All right, hello. So again, this is the workshop to discuss recount reports from Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And so I'll give a quick overview, but before that, my name is Lynne Serpe, and I was the Deputy Recount Manager, so I sort of oversaw efforts in all three states and probably focused a little more on Pennsylvania. To my left,
I'm Rick Lass, and I actually was in Wisconsin for most of the recount there, but also was watching Michigan because I was originally from there. And
I'm George Martin from Wisconsin. I'll be reporting on what happened there.
So just a quick overview for some of you who may or may not know. In 2004, the Green Party presidential candidate David Cobb filed for recounts in Ohio and New Mexico. And so I ran the recount effort in Ohio in 2004, and Rick ran the recount effort in New Mexico. Unfortunately, in New Mexico, we were not able to get a recount, but I'm sure at some point Rick can tell us about all the fantastic things they did afterwards to result in some of the best recount and audit laws in the state. So the reason I mention that is because filing a recount demand was not something new for the Green Party. It was something new for Jill Stein, the presidential candidate, but it continued a history that the Greens have had of standing up for voters, voting rights, and voting justice. And so I wanted to start that and put that out there for those who maybe didn't know that, because that had been 12 years earlier. It hadn't gotten a lot of media attention. This was before Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. And so a lot of folks weren't even aware that there had been an effort in New Mexico, and certainly were not necessarily aware of the Greens' role in the recount efforts. So what had happened was, in the aftermath this time around of the election, a couple of weeks later, in the days just prior to Thanksgiving, we were getting contacted by folks in different states who really wanted us to file a recount demand. And we were tired. A lot of us were really looking forward to seeing our families over the Thanksgiving holiday. Some people had travel plans, had arranged surgeries. There was a whole lot of reasons why a lot of us were very, very tired. But the information, the evidence, and the anecdotal evidence that we were being presented with was really compelling. And so our candidate, Jill Stein, decided that we would go ahead and try to do recount efforts in those three states. Those were the states where the most information was presented to us, and those were states where, when we looked at the law, we still had time to file a recount demand. So on the day before Thanksgiving, we were on a conference call, some of us, in the morning, and David Cobb, the Green Party presidential campaign manager, got off the call briefly because he said, "Oh, Jill's calling in." And then he got on the call about 30 seconds later. He said, "Okay, we're on." So now all of a sudden we have to go raise millions of dollars because we were trying to do recounts in multiple states. And not every state was clear about what the recount fee would be. So I think I had a train to catch in about a half hour. I think Jill was maybe off in the woods somewhere in Maine. David was somewhere in Texas. Rick was 4 hours from civilization in New Mexico, but that's where he normally lives. And all of a sudden we had to raise money. And it was basically an idea of, like, if you build it, if you, the people, build it, we will come. So if you help us raise the money, then we will do our best to stand up for the voters. And so throughout that evening and the next day, I myself personally was compulsively checking the website to see how much money we were raising. And it was really inspiring to see how much money we were raising and to go in the back end and see how many individual voters or residents were pitching in money. At the end of the day, we had over 161,000 people donate to the recount effort. We raised over $7 million. And that type of demand made it clear to us that the decision to file for the recounts was the right decision to make. So I just wanted to give that quick overview because at the end of the day, a lot of people ask questions about why did you do this or why did you do that or why didn't you do this? And part of it really was we were under a very significant time crunch. We had to file paperwork the next day. We had to file paperwork on Monday. We had to raise the money. We were making very fast decisions, and there was intense scrutiny in the social media world that we hadn't had to experience in 2004. So that was my just quick overview. What again I mentioned, so we're going to have George talk about Wisconsin, Rick talk about Michigan, and I'll talk about Pennsylvania, and then we'll do questions at the end. So I'm going to invite George wherever you wish to speak. If you're more comfortable there, where you are, it's up to you.
Yeah, I can. I'm good. I'm good. Hello, family. This was really an organic effort and went very quickly. On the Monday of Thanksgiving week, a local minister, who's a friend of mine and did not know that I was green, called me to say that there was a sisterhood of ministers that was concerned about justice and the need for a recount. And they were planning on doing a picket line at a mall on Friday, on Black Friday. And we talked, and I said, well, it's too complicated an issue, for signs next to the road. So looking ahead and working with them right away, aside from getting in touch with the campaign, I reserved our City Hall Rotunda. And we really like in Milwaukee to claim that space in terms of our democracy, not knowing that this was happening. It's all, I'm to David, what's happening? Is this happening? We're on the phone. And David's saying, I don't know yet. I'll get back to you. So Wednesday morning, as he just mentioned, I'm on the phone, David, what's happening? We're ready to go. And he said it's a go. And we had the press relations calling for the news conference out the day before Thanksgiving. We hit it in stride. And from my standpoint, our standpoint, it's something that we always wanted to do in Wisconsin. 2002 was the first time I wrote about black box voting and flipping the votes. And also with our history in the Green Party in 2000 with the fiasco in Florida, standing with black students who had been denied the right to vote, with what happened in Ohio in 2004, and I worked Ohio on a nonpartisan basis, 2004, 2008. So, I was really akin to what was happening. And so this was an opportunity for us to really get into the machines in Wisconsin. And so it was a real rush within probably 3 working days after it was announced on that Friday. And when we announced it on that Friday, we hit every local affiliate evening news in the United States. Every one. We hit NPR, and the word was out, and the fundraising kept going. The fundraising kept going. Once they acknowledged that the suit was being taken, there was a 13-day span, 3 days for the election commission to get it together, and then 10 days for us to do it. For us to do a recount of 3 million votes. We came in to the point of the suit for the recount, asking to get in the machines. We were expecting about $1.9 million costs. They threw $4 million at us. And we really felt it was observed. People were saying there's no way they can do that. There had been a recount on a state judgeship 2 or 3 years earlier. In comparison, it just didn't make sense. But it was out to scare us. Then it came back to $3.5 million. Ultimately, it ended up costing about $2.1 million. So you can see the relativity of, they really doubled the price in terms of trying to scare us off. But we moved ahead, and also with the resources of fundraising being having a really good legal team, and that was so important. We sued to continue to get into the machines. That was denied. The judge who made the decision said that he fundamentally agreed, but he didn't see a way in the law to make it happen. So it was left to the state election commission to determine how they would do it. And they allowed the 72 counties to decide individually. And within that process, half the counties who don't use machines did a hand count. The counties that used machines decided to use the machines again. So that what that meant to us was there was no checking in the machines before and after the presidential election in November. And here we were going back to the same machines again without a pre-check or a check during the process. So it was a magnanimous situation. 3,000 poll workers, 72 counties. We had over 3,000 volunteers. that came from our Green Party base, from the volunteer base for the recount, and other parties are people who just get concerned. So we were working, right with the Democrats and the Libertarians and also the Republicans, everyone in the observation areas. And in terms of what happened in the counties themselves, what we found, and we were also able to have a boiler room in Madison where there could be immediate response to questions in terms of how this should be done, how this should be documented. We did training sessions ahead of time in terms of very complex processes and laws. What came out of it was kind of what I expected. In the hand count areas, we found 17,000 votes that weren't counted correctly. And even in some wards, a bag of 200 votes that was missing for a while till they found it. In the other half of the counties where there was machine count, it came out about the same. In our estimation, without having the detail, and it was the obstruction was so much. The counties themselves got the report in on time in terms of the numbers, but never gave the background detail. In fact, handed the background reports in after the date that we might be able to appeal in terms of indiscretions. As of the turn of the year, the recount was in December. As of January, February, some counties had not even given their written reports yet. So it was very difficult for us to ascertain things. But what we feel is that we know 17,000 weren't counted. Just to extrapolate the other half of the state, it was at least another 17,000, if not more. So that's 35,000 votes that weren't counted, at least. We had some examples where, we weren't allowed to get into the machines, but up in Green Bay, one of our larger counties, they took a stack of ballots and ran it through a voting machine 3 times and got 3 different results. Yes. 3 different results from the same stack. So that's how come it was so important to us to really get in, and still is for us to get into those machines. It was a magnanimous task. We had a lot of people working on this, and it was very quick. It was very quick. From the standpoint of the Wisconsin Green Party, we certainly weren't satisfied with what happened, and we created a Federal Election Commission registered nonpartisan organization called Count My Vote Wisconsin to continue our election integrity efforts. And our plan is that we're still working within a very conservative legislature, but we're working toward an automatic audit after every election. When we look at our presidential election, and I want to get into some detail on this right now, but the standards that we judge other countries' elections by, our election would have failed here. And also, we've got 50 different electoral systems. But one thing that we do have is we have record of history. And I want to get into a little detail here, and it may be kind of hard to understand, but I'll try to get a little closer to you. This is important. Is this good for the camera? Right here? Okay. All right. In elections, and this is an analysis of the Trump vote in Wisconsin. In elections, we have an exit poll. And the exit poll is done as you leave the voting booth within about 10 feet. And the question is pretty simple. And I forget the name of the company that's done it forever, but it's who did you vote for? And people feel in their position to be really honest about that. Nobody else knows. But at the same time, as we do the math, we do a 95% confidence level, leaving a margin of 5% for error. And then that's cut in half to another 2.5%, depending upon the win or the loss. So what we have here, this green line is the exit poll. What came out of the exit poll. And in that poll, Trump had 44.3% of the votes. In the actual reported vote, he had 47.9% of the votes. Well, that's a 3.6% difference on the votes itself. So when you graph that out in a hyperbole, such as this, with the margin of error, that margin of error equates to this separation of the vote between reported and exit. The vote in Wisconsin would have happened once in 850 elections. Once in 850 elections would these kinds of numbers come out. Since 2000, this kind of analysis, the difference between the exit poll and reported vote has grown substantially each presidential election. And what that says to us is that something smelly here. We can't say there's fraud, but there needs to be a right. We have a right to really examine this and find out the truth. Okay. Yeah. So afterwards, if somebody wants to talk to us a little bit, but this is a part of it. This is a part of the national analysis in terms of why we did it in Wisconsin, aside from our own history. And our plan in Wisconsin, we're still in court, still trying to get into the machines. But our Wisconsin Green Party, we established this. We're working across the aisle as Greens. We want to continue to raise and be a full part of the United States political process. And so we've been working across the aisles with the Democrats and with clarity in terms of some relationships. And one is the Democratic Party leadership has agreed to and has been functioning in terms of protecting our right for a recount. The conservative legislature in Wisconsin is trying to make it so, trying to limit the opportunity for recount, and that it could only be done by one of the two top candidates, not by a third candidate. So in other words, we wouldn't be able to do this in the future. And at the same time, we're supporting them in redistricting. And it's working. So where we're coming from is that we are going to seek through the state legislature an automatic audit of the votes, automatically, on these large audits. And this is done in a lot of countries. You know, it's going to be very difficult. And if we're not able to pass that statewide, then we're committed to raise the money and go county by county for a referendum for a hand ballot. So we're not giving this up. We're going to pursue this because all of our votes should count. Thank you.
All right. Again, we'll take questions at the end.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about Michigan, and Lynn touched on in her introduction, you know, why we picked these three states. But in Michigan, it was pretty easy. For one, all three of these states flipped. They've been won by Democrats for decades, so that was one of the reasons is we had an unexpected result. As George said, exit polls didn't match actual election results. In Michigan, the margin of victory was only 10,000 votes, which is less than 0.5%. It's 0.22% of the vote. It was an extremely close election, and there were 70,000 ballots cast that didn't have a choice for president recorded. So that was a big signal right away that something was wrong. And we also had an election hotline on election day, and we had 3 reports from the Detroit area that machines were broken down, people were being turned away from the polls or being told to wait, not told how long they'd have to wait. So we know there was a lot of voter disenfranchisement that was caused specifically by voting machines malfunctioning. So we thought, you know, the case is ripe to go to Michigan and find out what happened, try to get to the bottom of it. So that's what we did. We filed on November 29th. Michigan has a 2-day period after the vote is certified that you can actually request a recount. So time was of the essence. It was a holiday weekend, but we got it done. We submitted $973,250 to the state of Michigan to conduct the recount. there was a mess of legal challenges, and as a result, we didn't get a full recount in Michigan. First, Trump objected to having a recount, as well as the Attorney General of the state of Michigan. First, he objected and asked for a delay, and then we objected to his objection. We felt like if they were going to make us get it done in 2 days, then they should get it done promptly as well. The Board of Canvassers then did vote in a tie vote that we would begin on December 6th. Originally they had said December 2nd, but December 2nd, 3rd, and 4th we were tied up in court. So on the 4th, the court told the State Board of Canvassers that we had to start on December 6th. Then again, the Michigan Republican Party and the Michigan Attorney General filed in federal court to stop the recount. And mind-bogglingly, the Sixth Circuit said we could not do the recount because Jill Stein was not qualified as what is called in law an aggrieved candidate. They felt like only Hillary Clinton would have standing in Michigan to ask for a recount, which to me is absurd. But it also points out something that, like in 2004, when John Kerry was skiing in the Alps and the Green Party was asking for recounts, again, Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party was absent from this very important procedure. Hillary Clinton's the one who had something to gain. We all knew Jill Stein was not going to win Michigan or Wisconsin or Pennsylvania based on what we'd seen. We had nothing to gain except to stand up for election integrity because, you know, we believe votes should be counted properly. So as of December 6th, the recount was stopped. It did start. So there was 3 days of recount happening. So that's sort of the legal issue. Our field I want to talk about in Michigan, like in Wisconsin, was really great. We had, well, one thing is Michigan has 81 counties. Instead of having a recount in each county, they wisely consolidated that to 19 recount centers. So in Michigan, we only had to staff 19 locations instead of 81, which, as many of you know, Michigan's a very large state. I don't think we would have had the personnel to cover the entire Upper Peninsula, for instance. So we, in that very, very short period of time, we had 2,000 people either in person or online take a recount training and be given the proper procedure for what to do if you see something that looks awkward. If they were given forms to report things, hotline phone numbers to call. We had lawyers standing by to come and do any legal work that might be required on that. It was a really well-run organization in a very short time. We had some really good people working, and thousands of other people wanted to take the training or wanted to observe and would have observed if it had gone more than just the 3 days. But again, these are weekdays. People might be at work and they can't make it, et cetera, et cetera. So I was very pleased with the field operation in Michigan and also with the legal team battling it out against all odds. Another aside on the legal issue, 2 of the Michigan Supreme Court justices are on Donald Trump's short list for filling federal court vacancies. So we were playing against a stacked deck. We did the best we could, and we did get a recount. Lynn wrote up here this website, and you can go to each state and you can view the reports that were submitted. There's thousands of reports up there that show minor and major discrepancies for all 3 of the states that happen. And I also want to just comment about some of the good things and some of the bad things about Michigan law. You know, overall, it was, you know, we didn't get the full recount we asked for, but in Wisconsin, we had to go to court and ask for a hand recount. In Michigan, we didn't have that problem because state law specifies that in a recount, all ballots will be tallied by hand. Great law. We like that. But on the downside, Michigan also has unrecountable precincts, which means if there's broken seals or broken containers, then they don't recount those ballots. Why, I don't know. And then they also have rules. Have any of you ever worked as a voting official, a poll judge, an election day worker? Okay, so there's three tallies that take place, that should take place on Election Day. One is how many voters signed in to the voter rolls. One is how many ballots were issued. And the third is what is the tally on each voting machine. That number for each machine or for each precinct should match in all three. There should be 375 people that signed in, 375 ballots that got given out, and the voting machine should total up to 375. If they don't, Michigan says you can't recount that precinct, which is like so not, makes no sense to me. I just can't even fathom why. I mean, right there, there's an indication that something went wrong in that precinct, and Michigan law says, well, can't do anything. You know, again, the majority of these problems took place in Wayne County, which is where Detroit is. I don't think I wrote down the exact number of problems there, but it was a very significant percentage of the problems were in the same place where the voting machines were breaking down. So while we like to praise Michigan for saying we'll do a hand count, we also need to criticize their crazy laws on the recount. Again, we did pay $973,000. The state gave us back $633 out of that because they only did a partial. I'm not sure it really cost them $340,000 to do 3 days worth of recounts, but that's sort of the end of the recount story on election or on recount day in Michigan. But again, you know, I do want to talk a little bit about New Mexico while I'm here with the microphone. This is what we want to happen in Wisconsin with Count My Vote in every state is after 2004 when the New Mexico State Canvassing Board denied us our recount illegally. We filed 2 lawsuits, and one said they denied us our recount illegally, and the state Supreme Court said, you're right, they did, but it's too late to do anything about it now because court cases take months and years. And we filed an equal protection based lawsuit that voters in 8 different counties, in New Mexico at the time there were 5 different voting systems, and so each county had a different system. Some had paper ballots and others didn't. So we were able to win that lawsuit as well, saying that it's not fair that I have a paper ballot and I can trust my vote, but my neighbor who voted over in the next county over had a touchscreen machine and he can't really be sure that his vote was counted. And this was before the touchscreen machines even had paper trails, the voter verified paper audit trail. So we won those lawsuits. We went to the legislature, and by 2006, we had gotten through the legislature a law requiring all paper ballots in every election in New Mexico and the automatic audits. So in New Mexico, based on how close an election is, they'll audit a certain number of precincts. And 2 years later, we got an automatic recount. So any election that's within 0.5%, as the Michigan one was, gets an automatic state-funded recount. And we actually did that in 2014 for a statewide election for our Commissioner of Public Lands. So we laid the groundwork in Michigan to say, here's the evidence, take it to the legislature and get this fixed. And like in Wisconsin, it's mostly Republicans in the legislature in Michigan, so we're not as hopeful as we are that this is going to happen promptly. But that's the end result. Again, we didn't expect that Jill Stein was going to suddenly be the winner in these 3 states, but we do expect our government to take this evidence into account and fix our broken system.
Great. So I've always found the New Mexico experience really inspiring, and I love hearing Rick talk about it because in 2004 we were so wrapped up in Ohio that when the State Canvassing Board, all 3 of which were Democrats, illegally said, no, we're going to charge you more money, similar to the game they played in Wisconsin, rather than the $114,000 fee that was in statute, they basically said, oh no, you need to give us about $1.4 million and you have about 24 hours to do so. So we were unable in 2004 to turn around and raise that kind of money. So that's why we had to not have the recount and then have the subsequent litigation. So when Wisconsin played that game, it wasn't a new game, but we were ready. This time we had raised the money. We had done our best guess as far as how much it would cost based on that previous statewide recount. which had run about $550,000, but it had been counting about half the ballots. So our best guess had been, maybe 1.1 million or so, maybe 1.5. We didn't really know. And then, as George mentioned, they basically tripled it. And then they gave us back, a good chunk of money at the end. So, these are the games they play. They make it very, very difficult. And the reason I mention all that is because now we're going to talk about Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania's recount law was a shocker. So we decided the day before Thanksgiving that we are going to go and do these recounts in Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. And while the law wasn't great in Michigan and Wisconsin, other than a few things that have been highlighted, it's still fairly straightforward. Whereas in Pennsylvania, the law is not straightforward. It is complicated, complex. I believe the word used often in our lawsuits is Byzantine. It was amazing. So on Thanksgiving Day, rather than, enjoying time with my family, I was online trying to figure out the recount law. So I want to give a quick shout out to Mark Halverson, who's here in the room. He started an organization called the Center for Election Integrity, Citizens for Election Integrity, Minnesota. And I met Mark in 2004 because he and a contingent of 9 Minnesotans came to Ohio to volunteer. And somehow they got so fired up on this issue that they went back to Minnesota. They worked on the laws there. They were, an integral part of making sure things went smoothly in 2008 with the Senate recount, the U.S. Senate recount, and then they formed this amazing resource, this searchable database of recount laws, and then there's also a searchable database of audit laws, and it was enormously helpful because, of course, Thanksgiving, the county offices are closed, the state offices are closed, and they're closed on the Friday. Oh yeah, and they're closed on the Saturday, and they're closed on the Sunday. So at least there was information in one place that we could go and look. But no matter how often I looked at the great resource that Mark and others had put together, I just couldn't wrap my head around it. And here's why. In Pennsylvania, we were not able, as the Green Party or the Jill Stein campaign, to just file a recount. We couldn't just pay a fee and say, please recount these votes. We have heard from hundreds, if not thousands, of voters around the state that they are concerned that their votes didn't count. And Pennsylvania has mostly DREs, the direct recording electronic. I think it's maybe about 85% of the state uses DREs. I might have that number a little wrong. So instead, what had to happen, there are 9,158 districts or precincts, and in every precinct, 3 voters had to notarize petitions, affidavits, asking for a recount. So that would mean 27,474 voters statewide would have to file paperwork that they got notarized and then turn them into their county within a certain time frame, which was generally 5 days after the initial recanvass had happened. The problem is that no one knew when those deadlines were. So it wasn't online. So Thanksgiving, day after Thanksgiving, Saturday, Sunday, we had no clue. Earlier that week, local activists had already started, similar to in Wisconsin. People were already so upset that they had taken upon themselves to try to figure out how to navigate and maneuver through the system. And then when we decided we would help, we had the legal resources and some financial resources to really help aid this effort. So people had been calling their local county boards to try to figure out what the deadlines were. When did the 5-day trigger start? Where do we turn in? Are you going to charge us a fee? Because there's different language in the law, or maybe it's a $50 filing fee, or maybe it's a $100 filing fee. And the problem was that the counties either didn't know, the counties didn't answer, it wasn't available online. The state, Department of State, didn't tell us. On that Monday, November 28th, they still didn't tell us. Then they provided information, and half the information was wrong or inaccurate. And then they changed their mind a couple hours later, and they completely changed the process. So you had people going to file, and they filed maybe with the County Board of Elections, or they were told to go file in the court or with the Protho notary. And then, it was like so complicated. At the end of the day, about 1,300 voters turned in signed affidavits. So far short of the 27,000 that was needed, but still a massive effort. People were doing this on a weekday. not knowing where to go, not knowing if the deadline had passed or not passed, being told first to go to one place, then to go to another place, and then in the second place, there's an example, it's in our lawsuit, where they went with their signed notarized affidavit only to be told, oh no, you have to go to court, and you have to have it in triplicate, and you need to have, and it was 3:30 when they were told this, and the deadline was 4, and they were unable to do it. It's like, I have in front of me this 39-page filing in federal court that's available on our website. I'm going to read some of it just because it's shocking. I'm, just crazy, but it's really instructive to go online and, one, be inspired by the citizen-led effort, and two, be horrified by just how many bureaucratic hurdles are put in place in the law, irrespective of who was running. This had nothing to do with the given candidates. This is the stuff that's been in state law. It had nothing to do with who won, who lost. This is just how difficult they make it. So, and it was interesting to me because in comparison, it made 2004 in Ohio look like a cakewalk. I mean, the election code there is fairly straightforward. You pay the fee. We're going to recount the votes. We're going to randomly select 3% of the precincts. We're going to do a hand count. We're going to run it through the machines. If they match, then that's fine. It's done. If they don't match, we do a full hand recount. The biggest problem we had in 04 was that pretty much no county, maybe a handful of counties, bothered to do a true random selection of their precincts. They tried to sort of predetermine which precincts they thought that they knew wouldn't cause problems, and it had seemed complicated at the time. We had like 8 different dates where we started, 88 different counties, 5 different voting equipments, 1,300 volunteers. None of us had ever done it before. And that, like I said, looking back 12 years, I'm like, compared to Pennsylvania, Ohio is a cakewalk. And I don't think I would ever have imagined that I ever would have made that statement. Pennsylvania is a huge mess. But Pennsylvania is also one of the few states in the country that still use these paperless DREs. They're using voting equipment that were banned in California. Because another result of the 2004 efforts in Ohio and New Mexico was that California initiated a top-to-bottom review of their voting equipment. And they got rid of, or tried to get rid of, their paperless DREs. So if you, again, read this court filing, it goes through all the different types of voting machines used, and it says like again and again and again. Well, this machine was reviewed in California and deemed as, not secure. It's no longer used. This machine, it's horrifying. So fast forwarding, basically, really only in Chester County were we able to really get a recount. So we had voters filing, like I said, 1,300 of them. They filed in dozens of counties. In some cases, they filed with the county election board, but then the state said, oh no, you have to file it in court. But then they didn't go back and tell people. So then their affidavits were basically thrown out. In other places, they said, oh, you need to pay some money. So let me see if I can find it in here. There are some numbers that were just appalling, like some financial numbers of what they tried to do. Let's see. If you look at it, I have like, I was going to highlight and read what I thought was important. If you look at all this pink, this is why I'm not reading the 39 pages, because unfortunately I started highlighting. I was like, wow, everything is important. So I really do encourage you to go to jill2016.com/recount and go to Pennsylvania and look at. It is on the website. This is the most recent filing that we put in a new one in February of 2017. So here's just one example. Page 30. It says, Montgomery is a DRE county. Apparently following the faulty Department of State guidance, the county board refused to accept complete petitions from nearly 78 districts and instead told voters to file in the Court of Common Pleas. The board did this even though voters filed the petitions within the 5 days of the computation of unofficial results. The voters were forced to file in the Court of Common Pleas at a cost of $269.50 per petition, or $89.83 per voter, demanded by the Protho notary, who treated every petition as a separate court filing. The total cost for the 78 petitions was $21,021, which the Stein campaign paid on behalf of these voters. At an average of $269.50 per petition, in 9,158 districts, which is what they have statewide, the cost to voters of a statewide recount would be $2.4 million. So this was just an example, is that there's a mechanism where it says that you go and you file, and if you're filing with the board, you don't even have to pay a fee. If you file with the court, there was usually a fee. Then they went to the board, they told them to go to the court, because the Department of State, in the middle of the day on Monday, said, oh, don't go to the board, go to the courts. They went to the courts, they filed, this is, 78 petitions, $21,000 when they thought they didn't have to pay anything. This is one county, right? So, continuing in Montgomery, on November 30th, the Montgomery Court of Common Pleas held a hearing without notice to the voter petitioners. At the hearing, the county board argued the petitions were defective because the petition was not filed from every single election district in the entire county, and perhaps even the state. And because voters did not pay the $50 each in addition to the $269.50 per petition. So the court dismissed all the petitions orally on November 30th and by order dated December 1st. In a later order, the court held that unless petitions were filed in every district in every county, no one could file a petition in Pennsylvania. As a result, Montgomery did not recount or recanvass a single vote, much less permit voters or Stein to do a forensic exam of the voting system. Okay, so this filing is filled with stuff like that. It really is truly horrifying, but it's important for people to know what happened. So at the end of the day, we have a lawsuit. It's a federal lawsuit, and we're basically saying, similar to what I think Rick outlined, the idea that voters are saying, I don't know if my vote was counted. We have report after report of voters who voted on these DREs, and they said that the green light next to no vote lit up. So they voted for a candidate, and then that green light lit up. Sometimes the light was on for both their choice and the no vote, so they truly had no idea if their vote was counted. So they're basically saying those people were disenfranchised. Equal protection, because you do have some counties that use the paper ballots and optical scan. It was also the idea that people were denied their due process, and then the big thing is that saying we want to have that forensic examination of the equipment. So similar in Wisconsin, the folks in Pennsylvania have not given up. So the Stein campaign has not given up. We are continuing to, pursue every legal avenue that we can and to help support activists on the ground. And so Carl Romanelli, who was supposed to be here today, he had a health issue, and so unfortunately he couldn't be here. But Carl did an amazing job during the recount itself. And in the months since, Carl's been traveling around the country. He's been meeting with people in all these different counties, and the Pennsylvania legislature held a hearing on these issues. It wasn't the greatest hearing in the world. They have promised to do more. So Carl and others are making sure this issue won't die. The Stein campaign is making sure this issue won't die. But ultimately, in order to have success, we do need people to continue to put the pressure on. You need to continue to contact your legislators. You need to continue to say paperless DREs are not acceptable. We want paper ballots hand counted. It's just this constant ongoing pressure. We are seeing fewer and fewer states that only use the paperless DREs, but those states that do, as we've seen in Pennsylvania, are very, very important. So this effort that we did as Greens, as just activists who care about the integrity of our vote, this is a really important effort. And it still amazes me that I've now done 5 of them, or at least tried to do 5 of them. Something that as a student of government in college, I don't think I would have ever imagined. But as exhausting and demanding and as stressful as it is, it's some of the most important work that we can do. Obviously, democracy is about far more than voting. We've heard that again and again and again this weekend. And we as Greens see this as part of a larger and broader voting justice movement. But you can't take away or deny the fact that people who take the time out of their schedule to go and vote need to be sure that their vote was counted. That is just such a basic concept. And that's something that the Greens have been fighting for and will continue to fight for, especially when others walk away or ski away or don't bother to show up. All right, so thank you all for listening. We're going to take questions unless anyone on the panel has anything they want to add. Yep, exactly. And then we'll. Yep. No.
And thanks, Rick and Lynn. You brought up a couple points. One is that the voting machines, as Lynn mentioned, that are illegal in Pennsylvania, or that are Pennsylvania machines are illegal in California. The same situation. Wisconsin machines are illegal in California because they've been proven to be tamperable. The Wisconsin machines are provided by a small company here in Hudson, Minnesota, in a strip mall with 2 people in this company. And so we have, yes, I'm serious. I'm very serious. And so it also raises the question of the control of the donating the machines, maintenance, who's doing what. But it comes down to 2 people here in Minnesota control all our machines in Wisconsin. The other point I wanted to make, Rick brought up about the field team. We were real fortunate to have a great field team. Election integrity people from all over the country came to help. And so we were able to visit 72 counties. And a big part of our report is real important. And it is that in those 72 counties, policies, procedures were interpreted differently. There wasn't consistent training of poll workers. I mean, we could write thousands and thousands of pages about what we saw that was incorrect. And so there's a need for the whole state to have a revised system of training, policies, and procedures, because it takes away from our votes again. Thank you.
Okay. Should I? Oh, did you want one more?
Yeah. So I'm going to read one other paragraph. Sorry. So I just wanted to mention Montgomery County. So this is number 87, page 23. It says, other voters experience the same problems. This is the idea of trying to cast your vote, the green light saying no vote. There were 4,087 no votes, meaning no selections made for any candidate, office, or ballot question in Montgomery County alone. 4,087. So either 4,087 people in one county took the time to go to their polling place, wait in line, sign the voting book, walk into a voting booth, and decide not to cast a vote for anyone in any election, or the machines did not work. Point 88 is plainly the machines did not work. Thousands of Pennsylvania voters were disenfranchised. Like I said, there's so many examples of this type of stuff happening, and our job is to uncover it. And so a recount allows us to attempt to find out what's going on. This year in particular was very litigious, but one of the good things about litigation is it can be kind of used as discovery, is one of the other gentlemen who had done a recount in California on a panel the other day mentioned. And so we still have these lawsuits pending. And so while we're not hopeful, we also haven't given up. But I just wanted to mention that 4,087 people bothered to go to the polls and didn't vote for anyone. That's Rick mentioned in Michigan the idea that people went and supposedly didn't vote for president, but they still voted in the rest of the ballot. This is they didn't vote at all. 4,000 people show up, they didn't vote at all. It's a DRE, paperless. Clearly there was a problem. Okay. So, questions?
So I think we'll take questions. I saw you in the back.
And then the woman in the corner, and then the gentleman in the corner.
Okay.
You mentioned that you were successful in counting ballots in Chester County. Was that successful because you followed a different process, or they just did it quickly before Thanksgiving?
You should repeat the question.
Yeah, I will. Right. All right, let me find. So Chester, I remember Chester County because there was a local coordinator in Chester who was so gung-ho, and she was very, very active with her local Democratic Party club. And I think one of the reasons we did it in Chester is that, so the timeline worked for us. They hadn't yet finished counting their votes, so they did accept the recount petitions. And so a hand recount of paper ballots in 143 Chester precincts was completed on December 10th. Chester is the one and only county in the state where a substantial subset of voters had any meaningful opportunity to make sure their votes were counted accurately. And really it's so, that one hurdle was, had the deadline already passed? There's examples where I mentioned how the Department of State had put out a list on the Monday, and they would say things like, oh, they finished counting on the 21st, and so the deadline's like the 23rd 4th, like 3 days later, and it was supposed to be 5 days later. There's one example where I think they said they finished counting on the 22nd and the deadline was the 21st. I mean, there were just examples where they got it wrong. So in Chester, we were lucky. We had an amazing local coordinator who really just, beat the bushes, knocked on the doors. I mean, she was, I think, devoting her life to just getting these affidavits, and they still had the time to do so. So I don't know off the top of my head. I want to say it was the county, just from what I remember, but this is like 8 months ago, and there's a lot happening. Yeah, but good question. All right, ma'am in the back.
Okay, one very quick question. What's DRE?
Direct Recording Electronic. Right. I had mentioned it once, and I probably should have kept repeating it. Apologies. No. I tried to. Yep.
But the other question I have is, I think these things are going to continue happening until there's criminal prosecution. It sounds to me as if we have plenty of evidence of voter fraud and real voter fraud. So is that
election fraud? We call it election fraud to make it clear. Yeah. The reason why is when you say voter fraud, it's implying that the voter committed fraud. So it's a hot topic in the sort of election integrity community, election fraud. Yeah. Yep.
But my concern is ever since said right before 3-4 weeks before the elections are rigged,
right.
Like, yeah, you guys have been rigging for a long time. I'm in Columbus, Ohio with off the trade district.
Yep. Sure.
And I've been hearing about this for decades.
Yeah.
By now. And so when I heard that, I was like, this is really scary. And then, of course, I still didn't think there was a chance in hell he could win.
Mm-hmm.
But what about criminal prosecutions for this case?
Okay. So, thank you. So the question about criminal prosecutions, I can tell you that in Ohio, that there actually were criminal prosecutions of county election administration officials in Cuyahoga County. And they were sentenced to 18 months in jail. But that was around the conduct of the recount. So it wasn't related to the conduct of the election. What had happened in Ohio, as I mentioned, there was supposed to be this 3% random selection of precincts. And so a couple of election officials probably thought, we want to make sure that we don't have to do a full hand recount. So we're going to pre-select which precincts that we're confident will be able to run through the machine and get the same numbers. And they were taken to court over felony, misconduct, negligence. And so this was in 2004 when we did the recount in Ohio. So that didn't happen until like 2 years later. So the reason I mention it, though, is that's the only criminal proceeding that has happened that I'm aware of where actually people were sentenced to jail. But again, it happened well after the recount efforts, and we now have open recount efforts and open litigation in multiple states. So as far as I'm aware, there's not any effort or attempt right now for criminal-related action. I don't know if George or Rick know anything differently or wanted to comment on this.
I don't know.
Okay, so that's what I can tell you. Sorry.
Yeah, I noticed on those poster boards right there that you have a certain percentage of which is the raw exit poll data. But whenever I look on on the CNN webpage of what the exit polls are, like someone must have taken those numbers and then rigged them to match the recorded results. But I do remember back in 2004, like the afternoon of election day, it was showing like, John Kerry is running ahead in all these states, and then when it didn't turn out that way, they automatically assumed that the exit polls must have been off instead of looking at the mechanics. And ever since then, I have not seen or heard these raw exit polls being announced through the media. So someone is taking those numbers and then is guarding them like Fort Knox because they and then waiting till the elections come out to show the exit polls, because they apparently whoever's doing that does not want people to see to notice that there's an indication of fraud, and the exit polls are far more accurate than polls because they show who voted and who actually came. And what I was thinking is that maybe that discrepancy is like people who voted provisionally is like thinking they voted, and then those were the ballots at the back of the bus that didn't actually get counted. So is that the reason for those discrepancies in the posters? And is that the reason why? And why don't you see those? And where do you get those raw exit poll data from? If the media never reported on it.
Well, I didn't develop this. This came from our national legal team.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm not in a position to answer your question directly there.
I vaguely remember, and someone may or may not know, that there had been a lot of concerns about exit polling being released while polls were still open in other states. So, because California is 3 hours behind the East Coast and things like that. So I'm not sure if some of what you're talking about, like the delay in exit polling, might be related to that. Just because I sort of remember hearing about that. I don't know if there's anyone in the room. I saw a few people who sort of nodded, who might know more about it. But that's probably a
Okay.
Yeah, that would just might be something. But I don't know if Rick had anything to add. No. Okay. I will say, and I'll get to you in just a second. Obviously, exit polls, and I've heard George talk about this. It's the people as they're leaving. They actually voted, as opposed to the advance polls where they call someone and they may or may not vote. In general, you expect people to tell the truth about who they voted for, but obviously there's some people who may not, especially if there's someone around in, hearing distance who they don't want to know maybe that they voted for Trump or Hillary. But most of these exit polls have a margin of error. And that margin of error, I believe, is about 5% or
5%. So it's split in terms of whether you won or lost, and it becomes a 2.5%er. But it's based upon a 95% confidence level that people are telling the truth.
So I mentioned that only because I had heard George talk about that the other day, because people will say, well, even exit polls you can't trust. And it's true. People don't always tell the truth, especially within hearing other people around, but that is built into the probability. I will say that while exit poll discrepancies was something that we looked at, it wasn't the only reason that we asked for the recounts, and that was another point we wanted to try to make. It's just that, unfortunately, there's just compelling evidence at like every step of the process that there are problems, and we wanted to try to figure out what happened so that we can fix it for the future. We can't change what happened at this point, but we can try to work to fix it towards the future, building off the success in New Mexico. And I'm really confident that the Wisconsin folks, we've heard from George, they are determined to make sure things get better. And Carl, as I mentioned, is just working tirelessly to do the same in Pennsylvania. So there's another question in the back.
Yeah, you gave a nice lead in just a second ago. I'm curious about findings or lawsuits or work further up the chain. So the tabulators or whatever systems or software receive the electronic data from the polling machines and then arrive at, to use a hopefully useful term, the state total, right? Anything to offer about your recount efforts there in terms of trying to validate what happened outside the polling booth and to get the state totals?
So you're asking about the results from each precinct or county getting sent into the state Secretary of State or election office. That's one of the things that we're going to be pursuing, especially in Wisconsin, where I can pretty much say with almost certainty that we're going to be filing a suit to ask to see all the software. And in Wisconsin, and George can correct me if I'm wrong, the state actually has a law that they're supposed to have all that software in escrow, and they forgot to get it from the machine companies. So right now we're at the stage where the machine company and the Wisconsin Election Commission and the Stein campaign are negotiating is too strong of a word, trying to come to an agreement about what we can see and what we can't see and what we can say about what we see and what we can't say about what we see. The WEC, the Wisconsin Election Commission, really dropped the ball on this one because we should have had it already. And my personal opinion is they're going to finally say we can't get it, the corporation won't give it to us, and we're going to have to go to court. There's still a little bit of hope that we'll get to see it. So that information would be included if we get that. It's a great law on the books. Every state should have it, but they use both in Wisconsin. So, and all the machines that have been certified by the state, every election they reprogram the software because it's a different list of candidates and constitutional amendments and what have you. So when the machines are prepared for the election, the state is supposed to take custody of the software that's been programmed for that election. So that's what should happen. Did that address?
Yeah.
In Wisconsin, that is the law.
Right.
Yes.
And the machine at the state government, right?
There's
a database
Mhm.
with software, with configuration, with whatever rules are built into all of that, with whatever manual manipulation may or may not happen under control of a party appointed office, seems to me to be the other soft spot. So by email or after class, I'm a software engineer by trade and work at banks and think about security, and I'm appalled by all of this, and I've spent a while thinking about an approach that would require no custom software at all for each election. So the idea is to make it fully transparent and not require a skill set for citizen supervised elections of software engineering and forensics. The skill set ought to be, I can balance a checkbook and run a spreadsheet at a maximum.
Okay, great. I just to address what you said about the central tabulator, I believe that is part of what we're asking for. Yeah, so. Yes, sir? Oh.
So just real quick, I mean, a forensic audit is part of what's included in the federal lawsuit in Pennsylvania as well. I mean, not that we're hopeful necessarily, but it's in there. All right. Gentlemen.
More a couple of comments rather than questions. Okay. I live in St. Petersburg, Florida. I've been, as well as being a journalist, I've been an election integrity activist since, 2000. Guess why? Right? But I work with a guy who's used to be a lawyer, and he's come up with some very important points just about these issues from a legal point of view. And like in Florida, once the votes are tabulated, they're communicated by computer to a central tabulator. And my friend Mark Adams, the lawyer, he's been making the point for years that that is unconstitutional because it's unconstitutional to count votes in secret. And that constitutes counting votes in secret because you can't count the votes. You can't see the bytes as they're going through the wire. So it's an unconstitutional system based on that principle of law. And he's attacked it in Florida with some success. We haven't been able to overturn it yet, but it's an inherently an unconstitutional system if you're using any kind of electronic device that you can't verify to make that kind of a count. I've been in the tabulation rooms in Pasco County and in Pinellas County, where I live now, as a election monitor for the Reform Party and the Democratic Party, and I've gone in there. I watched the election workers tabulate the election. There's no way for me to tell what they're doing. All you can see is the computers. You can see status lights that there's activity in the machines, and that's it. That doesn't constitute any kind of verification. And I bring my video cameras and I video record the workers as they're doing the work, because in Florida every elections office has a plate glass window where you can actually see what they're doing. So I plant a video camera in there and I record what they're doing. And in 2012, I was in Pasco County when I lived in that county, which is just north of Pinellas County. Pinellas County is where St. Petersburg is located. And I had my video camera set up, and a county worker came in. and he was one of their tech people. And he walks up to me, and he looks at my video camera, and he sees that it's pointing into the count room. And he goes, "So what are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, we're trying to verify the election, and we're doing election monitoring because we're concerned that this constitutes counting votes in secret. There's no way to verify if this election is being conducted properly or not." And he says, "Sure." He says, "I could go down the street and do something," inferring that he could change the results of the election. And in Florida, the electronic voting machines that we had a wireless port on them. Why would you need a wireless port on a voting machine? Yeah, the reason's pretty obvious. You can put a wireless device in your pocket, and you could literally walk up to those machines and change the vote totals.
Right.
And something else that's been happening in Florida is that sometimes they don't even have, the vote totals aren't actually even changed. You just change who the candidate that they're credited to. So you can have a 48-51 election. It's all plausible. You know, the election's close, but this candidate won instead of the other one. Well, it was so close we could never tell. You know, so there are things like that going on. And it's also in Florida. The election, post-election certification audits are so weak that you can't tell from doing an audit what really happened because they only count 2% of the votes of any election.
So that just underscores a lot of what you've just been telling us about in Florida, why paper ballots are so important. And that's something that pretty much everyone in the EI community that I'm aware of, is pushing for paper ballots. We have just a couple of minutes left. I see a hand of someone who hasn't asked a question before, so I'll get to you in just a second. I'm just going to read one other paragraph because I didn't mention the contest of election in Pennsylvania. So there's this other avenue, which is that if 100 voters sign a petition in the Commonwealth Court to contest the election, but they had to do it by November 28th, so before the recount started. So they did that. And then there was the Commonwealth Court set a hearing date in December. The petitioners requested that the hearing be continued and the contest petition basically be delayed until a recount could happen. Because the thing about the contest of election, you basically have to go in saying fraud happened. But you don't have the proof because you didn't have the recount. But the court denied the request and required the voters to post a $1 million bond to continue the case. So even though in Pennsylvania state law, one of the ways is to do this filing a contest of election, which they had done, they then said, oh, and you have to give us a $1 million bond. And so at that point, they withdrew, their petition. So I just wanted to mention that because I had forgotten. So I see Rick is writing some stuff up there. Excellent. George, did you have something you wanted to mention? Otherwise, there's a woman with a question.
I'm good.
Okay, so ma'am with your question.
Yeah, so what are you saying that all states still have it set up where people are voting by paper, meaning that they're voting on paper?
So what we want to see is every state people voting on paper ballots, yes. Right now, there are states that they weren't. So the DRE, the direct recording electronic touch screen, like I live in Louisiana now, so when I voted, there was a DRE, and so I went in and I touched the screen, and a little light lit up next to my selection, and then I pressed a button. There was no voter verifiable paper audit trail, so I pressed a button and hoped, right. So that's one of the problems. Was a problem we had, and I think it's about 85% of Pennsylvania uses that type of voting equipment. So that again that's why so many voters really don't even know whether their votes were counted, just in general.
Yeah, when I was a little kid, before, or when I was a teenager, pretending to, during the Carter Ford presidents, well, I can talk to you more about this later on.
So it is time. I want to summarize sort of the teacher in me wants to give all of you some homework. When you go back to your states, there's a lot of election issues, but as far as audits and recounts go, the sort of gold standard we're asking people to pursue at the state legislature is all paper ballots. Every voter votes on a paper ballot because then there's something to recount. And those are read by the optical scan machines. So to make sure the optical scan machines are working, we need, I call it a mathematically significant audit. I think more technical people call it risk limited or something like that, which basically means if there's someone gets 65% of the vote, their opponent gets 35% of the vote, check a few machines, make sure there wasn't any glaring error. In a close election, you want to check a higher number of machines because there's more possibilities that the election results were wrong. So in a close election, maybe 2% or 3%, you audit more machines. And by audit, I mean you hand count the ballots that were fed through that machine and you compare it. Okay, and then the third step is in an extremely close election. In New Mexico, it's 0.5%. It's not a magic number, but it's one that was determined by some experts. Those elections, we have an automatically triggered, state-funded, hand-counted recount. So that's what we want you to go back to your state legislature and say, I want my community to trust these election results, and this is how we can do that. So that's sort of my summary. My hope is that soon all 51 states will have this system in place. And then we can start to work on all the other problems.
Yeah.
Great. So thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate your patience and questions.
I appreciate your patience.
Yeah.